Hey guys, we're back for part 2 of our goals series where we're talking about setting and accomplishing goals. There's this quote from a book, The Little Prince, that says, "A goal without a plan is just a wish." And those words are so true, because to accomplish anything, we need a plan. Last week we saw that Nehemiah had a big goal inspired by a big problem. He set out to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem so that God's people would be protected and God would be honored. So we know that Nehemiah had a goal, but did he have a plan? Now in chapter 1 verse 4 to 11 we see that the first thing Nehemiah did was spend time in prayer. And when reading his prayer, there's 3 important things that we need to take note of. First of all, Nehemiah didn't ask God for step-by-step instructions. He knew that God wanted him to take the lead in rebuilding the walls. So he started planning. By the time he reached the end of his prayer, Nehemiah was already working on a plan because he asked God to help him be successful in what he was about to attempt. And then at the end of verse 11, which is at the end of that chapter, he says that he is cupbearer to the king. And I think one of the reasons he mentions this is to show us that he is taking note of the resources that God has already given him. See, as cupbearer to the king, he had access and influence with the most powerful person in the kingdom. So Nehemiah was planning while he prayed, and he took time to prepare before setting out to achieve his goal. Now we discover in Nehemiah chapter 2 verse 1 to 9 that he hadn't just been praying and casually planning, but he had been preparing in great detail. See, in verse 2 to 3, the king asked Nehemiah why he looked sad, and Nehemiah had an answer ready for him. He was sad because Jerusalem was still in ruins. In verse 4 to 5, the king asks him what he wanted, and Nehemiah had a request prepared. He asked him to send him to go rebuild. In verse 6, the king wants to know how long Nehemiah's journey would take, and he had a timeline prepared for him. And then in verse 7 to 8, since the king seemed pretty open to Nehemiah's ideas, he also had a list of requests prepared. He asked for letters to the governors so that he would have safe passage and so that he would have access to wood for the beams of the gates. Throughout the process, Nehemiah continued to pray, but he didn't wait for God to do all the work. He used his strategic mind that God had given him to plan and prepare while he was waiting for the right opportunity. And because he had prepared in detail, when the opportunity arose, he was ready to ask for what he needed. Now, when you read further on in chapter 2, you see that after his planning and preparation, Nehemiah set out to achieve his goal. But he couldn't do it alone. He knew that he needed the help of others, so he started to recruit people. In fact, in chapter 3, there's a list of names of people who helped him. But when you're working on a God-sized goal, you need to realize that you'll probably face opposition. And once again, we see in these verses that Nehemiah was ready. He wasn't naive, he expected people to oppose him. And that's why he was wise about who he trusted, and he made sure to surround himself with the right people. Now I'm sure that Nehemiah felt scared and overwhelmed sometimes, but he didn't give up and he didn't wait for someone else to handle it. He made a plan and he trusted that accomplishing this God-sized goal was exactly what he was made to do. And just like Nehemiah, you are designed for God-sized goals too. See, God designed you to do big things, and He has already given you what you need to accomplish the goals that He puts in your heart. You've got you. You've got a mind that can think, plan, and strategize. You have a unique blend of skills, knowledge, and experience. And you have God-given interests, passions, and talents. Then you have others. There's a lot that we can accomplish on our own, but if we want to make a lasting impact, a lasting change, then we are going to need other people. So think about who you can work with. It can be your friends, your family, trusted adults, teachers, coaches, or mentors. And think about the access to knowledge from experts that you have thanks to books and online resources. Then you have things. You're probably going to need some things to accomplish your goal, and everyone's goal is going to require different things. So think about what you will need and where you can get it. And finally, and most importantly, you have God. Whether your goal is an everyday you-sized goal or a once-in-a-lifetime God-sized goal, God is with you. So remember, you are designed for God-sized goals. You have the bricks. Now what are you going to build with them? But before you get building, there's something else you need to know. Achieving your goal is going to be hard work. Even when we have the most detailed plans and the best of intentions, it is going to take strength, commitment, and perseverance to follow through. When things get difficult and you feel weak and discouraged, how do you keep pushing on? How do you keep pursuing your goals and finish strong? Well, let's go back to Nehemiah. I mentioned that we'll face opposition and that Nehemiah faced opposition. In chapter 4, verse 1 to 3, we see two of his enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah, calling Nehemiah and his team weak. They mocked them and they tried to crush their hope. So how did Nehemiah handle this opposition and frustration? How did he find the strength to keep going? Chapter 4, verse 4 to 6 says, "Hear us, our God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insult in the face of the builders. So we have rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart." From this, we can see that Nehemiah didn't get distracted. He didn't fight with his enemies. He didn't add to the drama. In fact, he didn't even respond to their insults. Instead, he took it to God. He asked God to hear his prayer, to make it right, and he wasn't afraid to be honest about how he was feeling. And then Nehemiah kept going. He and his team kept building, no matter what their enemies had to say. Unfortunately, their opposition continued. And in verse 7 to 23, we see that the strength of the team was beginning to give out. But even so, Nehemiah was committed and strategic, and he took care of his community. In verse 19 to 20, we see that the team committed to protecting and supporting each other for as long as their opposition lasted. So just like Nehemiah planned for opposition, we need to be aware that we are going to face difficulties when we are pursuing God-sized goals. But here's the good news. No matter what the world throws at us, God gives us strength to continue. So when you need strength to pursue a God-sized goal, learn from Nehemiah. Take it to God. Nehemiah was in constant communication with God, but this was especially true when he was facing opposition. So when you're struggling with your goals, talk to God about it. And then choose community. God gives us strength through the Holy Spirit, but he also gives us strength through our community. We need each other. So when you're facing opposition and losing strength, lean on your people, on the people that you trust. Thirdly, don't get distracted. When you're following God, not everyone is going to like it or support you, and that's okay. It's not your job to please everyone. Just stay focused on pleasing God and leaning on those people who want what's best for you. And lastly, keep going. Opposition will come. Things will get difficult. But with God, you can keep going. So remember, you are designed for God-sized goals, and God will give you the strength to continue to pursue them even in the face of opposition.